always at school, they ask us to write an essay with the subject, what would a society be? What would the world be without laws? And always, we say, in ruins, unable to exist. We say that laws are what make us a society, that built our world, its foundation. And they do. But is that all they do? Are there not laws that divide us? Laws that have ruined our world? Laws that enable war, pollution, wars that condemn foreigners for leaving their country, for wanting a better life? Wars that treat some people as better than others? Wars that don't allow people free speech, don't allow women abortion? Do laws also not make our world, perhaps not a worse place, but make it what we now want to change? It's a good excuse, is it not? Our world is messed up because the laws make it this. There's rules. It's a foundation that we can't change. Let me ask you this. Who sets those laws? Is that not us? Is it not us that wrote the laws, that made our will to be absolute? I propose this.
Or what?
Society is not built on laws or rules, but it is built on people, on us. It is humans that make our society. It is us that have the power to change it, and that we should. I am not saying that laws are not important, that they are not what make us the way that we are, the human species the way that it is, but is that not something that we can change? I am not saying that the world would be a paradise without laws, that they do not give us peace, but they also give us war. It has always been this way. But we can change that. We have the power to abolish our laws, to change them, to fix them, but get rid of them also. We can make the world a better place. It is us who decided to punish those who didn't conform instead of teaching them. We can change that now. We can make our society a better place instead of using steel to make everyone obey. We can change the world. We don't need to write those down. We can change as people, and we should. Thank you. Thank you.
My topic is, what is culture? Now, I was born in Argentina, which may surprise you given that I am representing Brazil. Now, what do you think of when you think Brazil? You think beaches, carnival, football. Well, I like none of those things. In fact, the part of Brazil where I come from is nothing like the Amazon rainforest. Sprawling prairies and highlands mark this state where I live and where my family is from, which borders both Argentina and Uruguay, and is, in fact, much more culturally close to those countries than the rest of Brazil. If you may note, my teacher back there has a gourd of yerba mate, which is a traditional bitter tea which we drink there, both in Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. Well, you see, being split between two languages and two countries, which, by the way, are rivals in football, which is highly obnoxious most of the time, I've always had a bit of an identity crisis. You never quite feel Brazilian enough, and you never feel Argentinian enough in Argentina. I have lived and studied in both countries, and it's always been kind of a complicated thing. I am nicknamed the Argentinian in my school, and I have gotten way too many comments for it. You know, and still, even when your state where you live in is close to Argentina, it gets even more so confusing because you never know quite where you fit in. You feel excluded from your own country, and the part where I'm from in Argentina is Buenos Aires, which is also isolated from the rest of the country in a way or another due to being a highly metropolitan area. Alas, I still feel like I'm unfit to be here. It is weird to be representing a country which you don't truly feel connected about. At least I don't feel like I represent the expectations which you might have for a Brazilian contestant. And it is really quite awful sometimes. It is something I have to face constantly, and yet I am here. And do you know why I am here? First of all, I started learning English literature at a very young age. I've always been very passionate about it. My parents cut no expenses to have me learn a third language, especially given that it is a global language. But I fell in love with it because, in a sense, it is a way to chase my own identity beyond my nationality. I believe people often, especially abroad, do reduce the idea of the Brazilian or the Argentinian as the arrogant person, or the Brazilian as the guy who plays football. And really, it's the thing that's annoyed me most in my whole life. Do you know why I speak English? Because I want something that is mine. I want something that is beyond all stereotypes. I want to forge my own culture, to seek something that is truly Francisco and not Brazil or Argentina, beyond English and Spanish. So to that extent, I ask, what is culture anyway? What is it that defines us beyond just our nationalities, and I think we can shape it ourselves? Well, honestly, I have no idea. But I will quote my favorite song of all time, Suburbia Overture. It's only culture, and it's more afraid of you than you are of it. Thank you very much.
Freedom is important. I don't think that's a pretty controversial thing to say. After all, we here are sitting in a nation where freedom is valued as a human fundamental right. From the Greco-Roman Empire, where philosophers like Plato and Aristotle were debating on human freedoms, to the Enlightenment period, where freedom was codified as a human right by philosophers like John Locke and Voltaire, to right now, where we live in the free world, where our founding fathers wrote and codified into our constitutions the fundamental right of freedom. We enjoy the privilege of having the freedom to speak, the freedom to protest, the freedom to do whatever we want, at least within the confines of the law. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is not going to be a speech on why freedom is important or why freedom should be valued. No. I believe, and I credit you guys, that you understand why this is. I want you guys to understand what happens when freedom is at risk. Now, let's take a look at a bit of a history of freedom being at risk, right? Most of us know by the portraits that are sitting right outside that, like, in World War II, our ancestors, right, they fought against fascist regimes that were bearing down on the free world that we live in today. Millions perished, brave people perished, died defending this freedom. Moving along to something more local. Back in my home city of Hong Kong, during 2019, as most of you probably know, there were mass protests going on because citizens felt that their sovereignty, their freedom, their right to live, and their freedom of speech was at risk once again. And so, they once again chose to defend it. They went out on the streets, chose to get arrested, chose to get beaten because they wanted to protect their livelihoods. They wanted to protect their freedom. And even now, when we look towards in the status quo, actual dictatorships where freedom is not allowed, such as North Korea, even now, global powers are putting themselves at risk, putting their own countries and citizens at risk in order to resist these powers, knowing full well that North Korea probably has a nuclear arsenal ready to strike at any moment. Yet, we choose to defend freedom. Yet, we put our lives on the line. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to explore why we do this, why this human phenomenon is so consistent throughout history from World War II to now. Why do we defend freedom? Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's simple. Freedom is what makes us human. We're not animals. We're not trapped by our instincts, bound to nature, by our habitats and our habits. No. We have the freedom to traverse from the highest mountains to the deepest of the seas. We control our environment, and we have the freedom to explore it. We have the power to make choices based on logic and passion instead of our innate nature. So I want to bring you back to a conversation that I had just yesterday with my fellow competitors that was on the topic of freedom. We were discussing how much control should the government have, and I find it quite ironic that it is this exact same freedom of speech that allows us to discuss about freedom. It's this exact freedom of speech that allows me to make speeches in front of you guys right here. So let's not forget the value of freedom and why we defend it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, now I'm assuming I'm correct in thinking that you've all probably used a phone this morning, before you even got here. So I think it's fair to say that as individuals in the 21st century, there's absolutely no denying that we're not constantly surrounded by the media at all times. So I invite you to think back to the last time you were on your phone and you saw violent imagery. Perhaps it was footage of a protest, or even more horrifically, videos of war. But have you ever considered that violence is becoming normal in the media? And this is in fact promoting a more increased appearance of violence within society. Well, if you haven't, let me show you why you should. And I'd like to do this through showing you how the media is desensitizing us to violent images, and how it's using discriminatory language to promote violence and twist in the stories and feed into stereotypes. So, how is the media desensitizing us? Well, last year I took my GCSE in English literature, and I had the privilege of learning about this poem called The War Photographer. It's about this photographer that goes to areas of civil conflict and photographs the evidence, but can't involve himself in the events. He's just there to observe. And he talks about how he's become desensitized and how he has to make this so the media can profit. And I argue that as social media is becoming more common, as we're becoming more used to going on platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat, we're becoming more normalized to these sorts of images, and in effect, being desensitized to these. Now, some of you might be thinking, if we're being desensitized, how is this increasing violence? Well, I believe this means that people that are struggling and suffering have to go to greater means. More extravagant events need to occur for us to notice them, so we take action, therefore increasing the levels of violence within society. Our ignorance leads to more violence. We need to react earlier and understand what people are going through. And secondly, I'd like to talk about how the media is using language to feed into discriminatory stereotypes and twist the story, therefore leading to a form of subtle violence within society. Now, I'm not sure if any of you have read this article in The Guardian, but there's an article called Flouncy, Fierce and Bossy, and it explores how these words are commonly used, particularly in politics, to explain how women behave. Now, it shows that there is these stereotypes that exist within society, which hold people back. And it's not only sexism that this is prevalent for. We see it with protests, how if the media doesn't agree with what people are standing up for, they use riots and explain how these people are causing destruction, when in fact, they're just standing up for what they believe in. Again, causing barriers and causing people to have to go more extreme in their actions to get an effect, therefore leading to more violence. And also, we just need to appreciate that everyone has power within society. We should not hold people back just because of something they can't control. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to leave you with this. The media holds power and it can create a more violent society. We need to hold it accountable for what it promotes to make sure we stop this. Thank you.
One thing I have learned is that you can't win without losing. Now, I'm not going to say I learned this from a book, or maybe I read it somewhere. I learned this through the hard way, and that is experience. So while growing up, my parents were involved in public speaking, so I decided to try. I started on a very good path. I did win a lot. But then, a time came, everything went south. I was no longer winning. The times when I got medals were no longer there. I was regarded as a failure. The curious me, I met up with people that I knew they failed constantly, and I feel bad about that, but I just wanted to know how you felt to lose, and maybe I could learn how to cope with this, because my confidence was at the lowest level. They said some things, they were like, you just have to cope with it, try to build your confidence, you one day win again. I said, okay. Fast forward to now, I won in my country. I'm no longer a failure. It's the same with Nigeria. Nigeria has never won the international public speaking competition. But then, we come back year after year. It's the same with your favorite football club. They don't always win. But, you see them? Have you ever seen any stop playing? They still get back to that pitch and try harder and harder again. Maybe because they have fans, though. What about every one of us here? Almost everyone has lost at one point in their life, right? Why I said almost was there are some lucky people who the earth turns in their favor and just might have not lost before. But then, what if you do? How are you going to cope with it? So I'll share how I was able to cope with mine. Luckily, I had a public speaking mom, and then she came to me and she was like, Folakemi, you won't always win in life. There are times where you have to accept defeat and know that you lost. Accept your failures with your head up high. Never give up. I looked to her and I was like, you've won a lot of public speaking competitions. How am I supposed to do this? You don't even know how to do this. But then she was like, at a point in time, you just need that space to rest. That space to know that you need to grow. She said a lot, and I learned a lot. I continued to build my confidence, tried walking, and here I am today. I won in my country. So I can gladly say, from age 16 to 20, I'm one of the best public speakers there. And that's nice. My failure didn't make me any less better. Because I accepted them doesn't mean I'm a coward. It means I'm strong enough to keep trying. So in life, you know that you might not always win, but then maybe the earth will just turn in your favor. Thank you.
Start. As Karl Marx said, was a mandatory sentence if you wanted to publish any sort of scientific or philosophical paper in Georgia up until the 1980s, back in the Soviet Union. This was because the ideology of Marxism was forced down everybody's throats, and you only had one choice. You had to quote Marx after every single opinion you said. If you didn't, they would not get your paper published, and back in the earlier times, you would probably be arrested or something worse might happen to you. This is a perfect example of censorship. What my professors used to do back in the 80s when they were my age is that they just say, as Karl Marx said at the start of their paper, and they just write their paper. And the publishing company wouldn't even read the thing, and they just see the word Marx, and they'd be like, perfect, give me 1,000 copies. So they'd get it published. After that, obviously, Georgia doesn't have censorship anymore, and most of the countries don't. However, we should still discuss why it's bad or why proponents of it might agree with it. It's a very important concept because it deals with the freedom of expression. There was a great philosopher back in the day called Plato who supported this idea, and he was an absolutely amazing thinker. So why would he support censorship? Well, he built an ideal model of a republic, and in this republic, censorship was encouraged. It was one of the cornerstones of success for this republic. You were only allowed to make art that was in praise of the republic. Anything else was not allowed. Why would he support this idea? That's because the republic that the censorship was encouraged in was absolutely perfect. So the ideology that was forced down your throat was 100% guaranteed to be perfect and flawless. So of course it's good to promote it, right? Because if you promote anything else, then you risk corrupting young minds. Unfortunately, we live in the real world, and nothing is perfect. In fact, everything is very far from it. Even in that fake ideal republic, we still believe that censorship would be horrible, because if your republic is so good, then why do you need to force the ideology down my throat? Why can't I just think freely and get to it on my own? But in other countries, such as the Soviet Union, which was far from ideal, and many other dictatorships and oppressive governments, censorship was used as one of the most dangerous tools to oppress people, to restrict freedom of expression, and to guarantee that their dictatorship would last longer than any other dictatorship has ever lasted. Censorship is an absolutely dangerous thing that must be avoided at all costs if you want your people to actually have freedom of expression and succeed and be in favor of your country. Because once someone inevitably notices a flaw, they will want to express it. Punishing this is one of the most unethical things one can ever possibly do. Thank you for listening.
I live in a country with more than 5,000 years of history. And in these 5,000 years, we once were the top of the world, where we have came up with one of the most amazing, innovative technologies, papers, printers, compass, you name it. And we also accumulated some of the most precious cultural treasures. We inherited them for generations and generations and generations. But is this always an upgoing hill? My history teacher told us no. As a Chinese saying goes, history is a circle. When there are ups, there are downs. So as I continued to study my history textbook, I figured out that there were times when my people were suffering, when we were losing every battle, from battle to battle to battle. In this circle, what do I feel? I feel the stench of dead, rotting bodies. I hear the roars of fighter jets. I feel the cries of my great-great-great-grandmother for the loss of her home. And my history teacher asked me, what do you feel? I said, maybe hatred, revenge in some kind of place. And he said, no. You should feel empathy. This is a circle of empathy. We are not the most unfortunate ones, for that right now, at this very moment, while we are studying in a bright and beautiful classroom, there are kids just maybe kilometers away, and they are still starving, and they're still dying, and they're still running from their homelands, and their homelands are still destroyed, just like us, maybe decades ago, maybe hundreds of years ago. When we look at other people's suffers, they remind them of ourselves. And what we should do is to empathize with them, to help them, to provide them with humanitarian aid. And this should not be a circle of hatred. This should not be a circle of wars. This should be a circle of empathy. This should be a circle of justice, so that we know that generation from generation we will create a better future for them, where people will no longer have hatred between each other, where there will be no information gap, there will be no discrepancy, and people will live a better life in our Mother Earth. So let us jump out of this circle of history and don't let the pain repeat again and again. And we should create a world with empathy, with justice, with every single children feeling that they have already lived a better lives than those ones that are described in our history textbooks. Thank you.